Is there any further questions on equalization? Or have I completely...
Why is a equalizer called musical?
Why is it...
parameter musical? What does it...
Yeah. Okay. Good question. All right. My version, my interpretation, I think. All right. I believe that if you have any musical program and it's going from low notes to high notes, again, spectrum analyzer, I think that the difficulty with electronics and music coming together is the fact that the electronics is a very surgical device. You know? For example, if we wanted to do something with this area here, we could analyze it and interpret it and see where it's at. And if you've got a equalizer that is, for example, you wanted to lift this up, if you have very sharp filters, yes, it would have the effect of boosting a part of that. You'd need another one, maybe sharp or whatever. You create what we call a comb filter effect across the top. And that ripple is what I analyze electronically as being undesirable, because it's not natural for things to change so rapidly and so precisely. The same as notching out a signal with a very steep notch. It will do the job and it will remove the opponent, the opposing filter noise or whatever, the sound. But I don't think I would call that musical. And my EQ designs are distinctly different to a lot of other people's. They're fundamentally very simple. They fundamentally work on the basis of, if I want to boost something, I will subtract it, but in a negative feedback sense. So I get the opposite to what it's doing. But by putting it in a negative feedback loop, I can control how gentle it might be. And for example, if you have a high frequency shelf, the mathematical relationship here is at this point when this is 3 dBs, and at this point when this is 3 dBs. The math relating to that is 1 over 2 pi RC if it's a resistance and a capacitance filter. That would be achieved like so. What that does here is this is an attenuator that cuts everything down to this level, and this here is a bypass of that attenuator to allow this slope to resume back to normal. So this is actually unity at that point, in fact, in the circuit. And where we have a F equals 1 over 2 pi RC, it's easy to see that if we halve either the capacitor or the resistor, the frequency will proportionally, inversely it's true, but will proportionately halve the frequency. And what that means is that in terms of the transition, this curve mathematically will be 6 dBs per octave. That is the slope rate of that, simply because that's a fact of electronic life. That is the relationship. There's no other constant in there, there's no other parameter. In all my equalization, and particularly in the products that have made me particularly well known in Series 80 status with Trident and the high def EQ and various other parameter stuff I've done with Al Schmidt and whatever, I actually incorporate into my formula a constant that I call K. And that relationship enables me, and I'm not going to go into too much more detail on that because it does fill up about 3 sheets of paper to explain, but trust me, by loading my EQ circuitry, which purist designers say is the bad thing to do, you must never do that. That's not what you do. It must always be 6 dBs per octave. What I've managed to achieve in my designs is this, where that slope is actually 4 dBs per octave. Now, that figure was derived empirically. It was derived by me listening to audio and playing with equalizers under different studio conditions years ago now. I'm talking 1969. And I had a little studio in England at that time, very successful operation in fact, and I was able to incorporate my knowledge that I'd gained working with the likes of Dick Denny at Vox, who had no theoretical electronics knowledge at all, none. Okay, he was the absolute total empirical designer, or we say in England, cut and try. It means you cut the wood and you hold it up. You know, if you cut it too short, it won't fit. So cut and try means you cut a bit off and you try it, you cut a bit more until you get it dead right. Where a skilled man would measure it and cut it to the right size to start with. But I don't criticise him for that. He was a brilliant guitarist. He played in the style of Django Reinhardt. He could play guitar so well that you would think it was Django Reinhardt. He knew every chord for every note, and he was a brilliant guy. And he learned by the empirical method of, and this was tube days, so he would hold a component in onto a circuit with his fingers, and there'd be a huge explosion, and he would come out all covered in black soot, and he'd go, "Don't ever connect that across there." And you go, "Okay, okay, Dick." So by process of almost killing himself, we developed this technique, and this is actually true. I'm not making this up. I mean, he was a great guy, and he would sit there with an amplifier upside down in front of him, his guitar on his lap, no test equipment, no oscilloscopes or generators or anything, and he would just diddle and try another component, diddle and try another component, diddle, you know. And this was the guy that created the AC30, you know. And you can't criticise the man or the product. He's no longer with us, sadly, but as I say, I was very lucky. I worked under Dick, and we got to know each other extremely well from a working point of view. We were good friends socially too, but we really got to understand this. And I used to say to Dick, you know, I'd say, "Look, I'm at college and I'm being told you can't do that. You can't put that resistor and that capacitor there, and you can't do this." And he went, "Why's that then?" And I could never answer him the "why is that then" question. It was like, why not? You know? When it came to equalization in my own studio, I never felt happy with 6 dB per octave or more for a general musical forming of a sound. And it wasn't until 1984, thereabouts, I think it was the date, when I got my first ever computer. Okay? and it was a real high-speed job at the time. It was a Tendon computer. It had a colour screen, which was quite amazing. It had a 20 megabyte hard drive. It had 1 megabyte of RAM. This was real deluxe, super speed, happening guy, you know. In those days, your resident RAM was limited to 640k kilobytes, and that's all you could have in a computer. You couldn't have more. And I was very lucky. I managed to get hold of a mathematical analyst program, which was dealing with pure mathematics, Fourier transforms, Nyquist stability criteria, things that mathematicians were doing, and I was doing with slide rule to do the calculations. Yeah, you know.
Abacus.
Huh?
Abacus.
Well, it wasn't an abacus, but it's called a slide rule. You had two rulers, one that slid inside the other. What do you call that in? Yeah? And that was it. I mean, you laugh, but I mean, it was good. I mean, I designed lots of products using that device. When I got this computer, I had this program and it could do mathematical analysis for me. And it was easy to program. It wasn't very friendly. It was in BASIC, the programming. But I was able to put in these formula. They're relatively simple. But to change the loading on the circuitry so that I could change these curves. And the interesting thing was when I got that computer, when I put in the circuitry that Dick Denny had used 30 years previous to create the AC30, he was actually thinking this way too. So what it proved to me was there is nobody cleverer than anybody else. All the knowledge we get, we borrow. When we go, we leave it behind, or it vaporizes, or in the atmosphere, and Uli believes in this, Uli Roth, we believe that there is knowledge and ideas that are floating in the ether, and you just have to get one, and when you've got it, look at it and use it. And I really believe in that, you know. I know it sounds a bit esoteric and a bit mystical, but I really think that those ideas come from somewhere. And I don't think any of us are so smart that we could say, oh yeah, I created that more than anybody else. Because there I was, creating this, and then analysing when the equipment was available, analysing circuitry from a long time ago, and other people have done it. Like with Hermann Helmholtz and his organ pipe. Okay, he wasn't a sound recording engineer, and he didn't say if you boost 660 when the track's in A, it's going to give you a nice sub-fundamental going on in there, pumping away. But that's the brilliance of being able to adopt situations, and I think that's really what this is all about, you know. And I found that 4 dBs per octave was what I called a musical equalizer. And so many people who have bought my products, so many Americans who christened me the father of British EQ, because I'd done work with the Beatles in the 60s, and I'd created the Vox stuff as well. I did the wah-wah pedal and other stuff in a team. It wasn't exclusive, but in a team of people. And working on those projects, you know, people review your stuff. They take my products and they go, yeah, it's really a musical EQ. And I think it's to do with the smoothness. The musical EQ answer to your question is it's in the smoothness with which you handle something. Because I don't believe that music that we enjoy is that variable in such a severe mathematical manner. I don't think it is. I think when you listen to a Bach sonata, and the notes are descending behind a chord, and you know it's happening, but it's not so obvious that it's right in the front, and you're listening to that falling away, and you're thinking, I think I know where this is going, and then suddenly he will modulate that chord, not to where you think it might go, and I think the modern day Bach for me is Burt Bacharach. He's got Bach in his name, but Burt Bacharach, in his music, when you listen to the compositions that he's written, the way in which he combines bass notes on a piano with the treble clef, the way those chords modulate, and you think, wow, just blows you away. He plays a flattened 10th chord, and you think, that doesn't make any sense. But the 10th is an octave below, whereas normally it would be on the top. And he's got it down here, and there's that, and it's going, and it just sets you alight, That to me is music as it's meant to be. All the other old rubbish that's generated is inherent in, I don't know, it's there, and it's probably why we've got that, is why we appreciate the really good stuff when we get it. But I think musical EQ, I think a musical console even, or a musical signal path, is based upon smoothness and a gentle approach towards where it ought to be going. So if you've got a 4 dB slope, like over here, I would put something in here that was really gentle. It would overlap in such a way that we would get combinations of those other frequencies adding and subtracting in a more gentle sense.